This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com. Well, it's Friday, and there's never a dull Friday in the existence of the cannabis universe and in pro-cannabis media. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Young, the host of Green Rush Live and also the founder of Pro-Cannabis Media. And we have a very interesting breaking news situation going on here in the cannabis business world. And every third Friday, we happen to have Morgan Fox from NORML joining us, and we have him again today. But I'm also going to be joined by my almost regular co-host, guest host, Josh Kincaid. Josh, how you doing today?
Good, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on again.
No. Happy you're here. And Morgan, I'm guessing you know what we're going to talk about. Do you know what we're going to talk about, Morgan?
I'm actually not exactly sure if it's breaking because I've been on the road since 7 a.m.
Okay, but you knew about the main case and the case of them challenging resident in Maine. And anyway, the federal court ruled on this. Now, did you know that?
I did.
Okay.
I'm still diving into exactly what that means nationally, as well as what that means for the jurisdiction of that particular circuit. But it's definitely very interesting to see the Dormant Commerce Clause being applied in such a fashion.
Yep. And that's exactly right. And you know, it's funny, it was a few months ago, we had the law professor from Vanderbilt on, I think it's Robert Michos, and he explained how that works and why he thinks it is in place and why, and this pretty much clears the way for interstate commerce in cannabis. And I mean, rather than reading the entire article from Marijuana Moment and Tom Angel, and we all know him, it was basically a 2-1 decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit that affirmed that interpretation, which is broadly meant to prevent states from enforcing laws that unduly restrict interstate commerce unless given specific instruction from Congress. Maine's residency requirement for medical marijuana licensing is an example of an excessive regulation to that end, the panel's majority found. So again, you know, it goes back to, in fact, when I was reading about this, and David Rabinovitz, he's kind of our resident historian. The Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment is playing a role in this too, I guess, as you look at this, because that has been renewed every year since 2014. And Congress has acknowledged that this market may continue to exist in some circumstances free from federal criminal enforcement. And the reaction from the cannabis industry community that I've been reading, these comments online, feel like this is a great kind of a shot across the bow again to Congress to understand that something has to be happen. There has to be some kind of reform. And I'm going to guess it's going to help you out in the trenches, right?
Well, absolutely. But let's look at this historically a little bit. So you go back to 2005 with the Supreme Court case of Gonzalez v. Raich, where the federal government basically said that they can continue to prosecute people even if they're in compliance with state law, because even somebody having a small amount of plants in their house, or having a small collective of plants with other patients, is technically a way to will influence interstate commerce. And this goes all the way back to like an old case called Wickard v. Filburn. So that was like kind of the start of this, and then now we have so many people that are trying to get something done with interstate commerce here. And this ruling, I think, is very interesting, but I think it's going to take a lot of legal heads to kind of parse out what exactly it means. And it's also only precedent for that particular circuit. And if you look at the issues of what Maine was trying to do, which was trying to keep basically the industry completely in-state and homegrown. You know, that is a laudable goal, but at the same time, that also prevents any sort of out-of-state investment in any of the companies that might be trying to get a leg up, particularly small businesses that don't necessarily have access to either in-state or traditional lending.
Yeah.
So it's a very complicated issue.
Of course it is. And I don't understand most of it other than what I read. And I'm a good reader. So I'm going to read this again about the appellate court ruling is limited in scope, that it currently is only directly affecting states within its jurisdiction, which covers Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Puerto Rico, and Rhode Island. How did Puerto Rico get in New England? That's what I'd like to know on that. Does anybody have any idea? Josh, everybody, we're shaking our heads.
I honestly don't know.
I mean, just because Alex Cora is the manager of the Red Sox, I mean, I don't get it. I mean, is that the only thing? I'm only kidding. So you're right about this, but Josh, I'm sure you have a question for Morgan regarding this. I'm just going to see if I can find any other key moments in this this article and share.
Well, just to get everybody up to speed, Dormant Commerce Clause is referring to the prohibition of the illicit in the Commerce Clause. So that's against states passing legislation that discriminates against the excessively burdensome interstate commerce. So you have Oregon that passed a law a few years ago that said they can buy and sell cannabis all day long once it becomes federally legal. But to get people up to speed, how can states supersede federal law? So if the whole West Coast, Alaska, Vancouver, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, California, they're all legal. Why can't we trade in between? It's because federal law says we can't. So the Dormant Commerce Clause, I don't understand how that could even be something that's looked at because of the feds. You can't have state laws supersede federal laws. Am I right on that, Morgan? Or does this have some other bearing that I'm unaware of?
Well, you're absolutely right. But at the same time, every single state law regarding cannabis, whether it be adult use or recreational or medical, is in violation of federal law. So technically, states could enter into interstate compacts, but they would be in violation of federal law. I feel like most state legislatures, as well as most state regulators for cannabis systems, feel like that might just be a step too far and would bring the hammer down on them. But they could do it and see what happens. Just like every single state that has passed sensible cannabis policy reform has done so so far. But the Dormant Commerce Clause really kicks in as soon as federal law changes, which means that you can be able to trade in this substance and transport it across state boundaries regardless. So, if say Nebraska continues to be an illegal state, once cannabis is legal federally, you can't, Nebraska would not be able to stop people from shipping cannabis through its territorial borders, and the federal government would not be able to stop states from entering into either interstate compacts or just doing business across borders. So it does create a lot of considerations that both state and federal lawmakers need to think about when they're approaching this. I haven't read this opinion thoroughly yet, but I would think that it doesn't really necessarily say that all of a sudden interstate commerce is legal. And anybody that is saying such, I think you need to really take it with a grain of salt and consult a ton of lawyers before you start shipping across state lines, because while it might not be an enforcement priority, you will still be doing that one thing that the feds are still really kind of iffy about. Even if they're letting states do their own thing, but as soon as you get into interstate commerce, they're going to want to have a much stronger position and a much stronger structure on it. And if people start doing it willy-nilly, I fear that it could create serious crackdowns.
Idaho doesn't even want you to transport hemp. There's a lot of issues just trying to get legal products.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there's still people sitting in jail right now in places like South Dakota for moving federally legal hemp products.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of issues that are out there, and But I want to continue with this because it says if Maine's residency requirement violates the Dormant Commerce Clause as an unconstitutionally protectionist policy, the same could theoretically be argued about state laws that prioritize licensing people who have been disproportionately harmed by the drug war. So there already is some pushback from the social equity community because we've got Robert Mikos. He's basically saying court decisions like this one could put an end to a lot of social equity licensing programs because those social equity licensing programs have had to rely on the same sort of residency discrimination to work. And that's Robert Mikos' quote from Vanderbilt. And then Shalene Title, who's a very outspoken cannabis advocate and a former commissioner for the original Cannabis Commission in Massachusetts. Now,
Shalene's my dude. She's awesome.
Everybody loves Shalene. I agree. She's now the founder of the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition, the CRCC. Here's her quote. The takeaway from an equity perspective is that regulators and people concerned about fair markets should understand the case and be prepared for dominoes to start falling, she said. Being informed and prepared is still the best way to counteract legal confusion and chaos that bigger companies benefit from. You know, Morgan, again, there's definitely a little battle inside the cannabis industry between the multi-state operators and those craft cultivators, the smaller ones. What kind of effect is that going to have on putting pressure to get anything passed in front of our Senate in the next, I don't even know, make it a decade at this point, because it doesn't look like anything's going to happen anytime soon.
I'm not even going to hazard a guess. But what I will say is that, one possible iteration of this ruling is that small businesses might be able to get additional funding from out of state in places where they were not allowed to do so. I mean, we all know, and, like groups like MCBA and others have all been just like harping on this, that, while we're getting very limited benefits and like emphasis on very limited from state level social equity programs, the best way to deal with these problems is to remove license caps. So I'm not sure if this particular ruling would necessarily have an impact on that. But all that being said, I think that we're really going to have to like dive into this, because I think that it could have, a lot of unforeseen consequences, both good and bad. I think that it kind of caught everybody a little bit off guard, and nobody is really sure exactly what this is going to mean. What I know for sure is that it's going to continue to be tied up in the courts, and this ruling is going to engender a whole lot more lawsuits for any sort of state protectionist structures. And unfortunately, most of the social equity programs that exist right now are based on limited license programs, which by their very nature are a little bit protectionist and might be thrown into a tumult because of this ruling. Right. But again, only within the jurisdiction of that particular circuit.
So Andrew Klein, I think you probably recognize, I don't know if you recognize that name. I do, senior counsel at Perkins Coie.
I respect Andrew quite a bit. I used to work with him at NCIA.
So he says there may be other non-protectionist reasons that states choose to ban such commerce under the status quo of federal prohibition. His quote, "It could be protectionalist. It could also be that those state rules are in place because everyone, including state legislatures and state regulators, have been under the impression that the Controlled Substances Act prohibits interstate commerce. Therefore, they're trying to sort of walk a fine line between abiding by some portion of the federal law while allowing for state sales." Does that make sense to you? His quote about
I mean, it's pretty pretty complicated, and I think that that's a definite good point. But when you come back to it, every single cannabis system violates the Controlled Substances Act. So it really comes down to a question of how far are people going to push it.
Yeah, and it says Klein said this decision should send a clear message to Congress that without action on federal cannabis reform that thoughtfully accounts for the complications of interstate commerce between divergent state markets, the industry will continue to find itself grappling with issues like this dormant commerce clause case. And this is his quote again. This is Andrew. In some ways, this ruling is a shot across the bow for the industry. And in some ways,
it's a shot across the bow for Congress. More importantly, because I think that Andrew is absolutely right.
Right.
You know, a system of laws where large and multi-million-dollar economic systems are technically illegal, but are being tolerated, and the piecemeal system that we have is not sustainable. And I think that this ruling kind of really it highlights the fact that federal law is standing in the way. Now we have all sorts of systems where state laws differ about things. I mean, alcohol still is one of those things where there are differences between state to state, and
Right.
there are also rules regarding interstate commerce when it comes to alcohol. Like some states will not, or some states have more stringent rules when you want to import beer, liquor than other states. They have more strict labeling rules. You have to go through more hoops and whatnot, and that is clearly going to continue in the cannabis system. But the fact that we have such a huge dichotomy between state and federal law, and states are continuing to move in the right direction on this, more and more states every year, and we're looking at potentially like 4 or 5 that could turn in November. I think that this court ruling is really a clear signal for Congress to get off their asses.
That's right, 100%. He says, this is Andrew again. It's a shot in the arm for the industry because the First Circuit recognized that a robust interstate market already exists that is likely to attract entrants far and wide and is supported by congressional action through the Rohrabacher-Farr law or clause or whatever. And one other little note here. New Jersey State Senate President Nicholas Cotari filed a bill this month that would authorize the governor to enter into agreements with other legal states to import and export cannabis. So this is just beginning. And you know what? Clarence Thomas is sitting there going, see, I told you these laws were screwed up, right? And he's right. I mean, and it's another reason why, and Josh, you've probably heard me say this. Morgan, I know you've said this. You want to invest in the cannabis industry, invest in a cannabis industry law firm. Okay, because they are going to make money no matter what the law says, right?
Well, I mean, a great person to speak with about interstate commerce issues is Adam Smith. I believe he's still with the Craft Cannabis Alliance up in Oregon, and he's been working on getting states to pass interstate commerce compacts that would be triggered as soon as they were allowed by federal law. And I think that at some point, some states might just say like, we're just going to go ahead anyway, regardless of federal law. But we'll see. At the end of the day, though, I think that it's really great to see that courts are recognizing that, not only do we have a vibrant multi-state regulated cannabis industry, but interstate commerce is already happening on the unregulated industry and has for decades. So, do you want to control it, or do you want to allow the interstate commerce to only be the purview of underground operators?
Yeah. And isn't it interstate commerce when there's an edible product in California that's also available in Massachusetts? It's the same recipe, the same genetics, the same manufacturing. It's all tested. And I mean, seems to me that is interstate commerce. The difference is they grew it and created it in one state to make it exactly the same as the other state. So it's like a license to recreate that recipe in a legal state. To me, that is interstate commerce.
Well, I mean, I think that you're onto something, but at the same time, intellectual property is not necessarily something that is held under the umbrella of interstate commerce. So, you can use the ideas and the methods and whatnot, but unless actual physical material is crossing state borders, it's not technically interstate commerce.
Right. And if it came from a seed, is that a little material, or is that still the gray area in this industry?
I mean, you'd have to talk to a lawyer about that.
Josh, what's your feeling about seeds and genetics? Because all three of us know there's a vibrant market for genetics on the internet.
Yeah, I would say grab as many as you can and store them in a dark, cool place, because if you try to find tobacco seeds, you won't find any anywhere on the planet. So eventually, whether it's 10 or 20 years, it's going to be really, really hard to find good genetics because, like I said, you can't find it in crops like tobacco anywhere.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you start to see proliferation of certain strains, and then other genetic material starts to kind of go by the wayside or disappear. I mean, I'm a hobby grower, and I save every single piece of genetics that I possibly can, just because I don't know if it's going to be available in the future.
Wow. Do you have Blue Dream circa 2008? Because that was a pretty phenomenal sativa with its euphoric, energetic, uplifting experience that's been bastardized since with just genetic mutations or whatever. But if anybody's got some Blue Dream from 10 years ago, hit me up.
Me too. Right now, I'm rolling 2005 White Widow strain.
Nice.
And that was the
It's
first.
very weak, which is right where my wheelhouse is.
Blue Dream was the first strain that I bought legally when visiting California 6 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And I do remember it, and I do enjoy that strain as well. Hey, Morgan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what's the latest on that CAO build? Is it, excuse me, I know it's not going to go anywhere fast, but Cory Booker made a few little noise this week when he said, again, he's more concerned about the expungement issue than the safe banking issue. Is that a sign of a rift between the senators who wrote this bill?
Not really. Everybody knew that it was going to be pretty much like damn near impossible to get all the votes that you need in order to pass comprehensive cannabis policy reform that includes descheduling. But I think that CAOA, at least in terms of the banking language, does provide a blueprint for what the sponsors are looking for in terms of banking, at least, and also provides a ton of awesome language in terms of social justice and restorative justice. Right now, it's in recess, but there are conversations ongoing about exactly, what we would want added to safe banking, as well as what we would want attached to it, including both federal expungement measures, things like the HOPE Act, which would facilitate state expungement, which is, in my opinion, far more important just because of the numbers. And then, things like veterans access and potentially, firearm protections for medical patients. I think that it's going to be very difficult to get anything across the board in the current Congress that actually provides federal funds to cannabis businesses through things like SBA. But it's definitely something that we're pushing for. And right now we're in a position where we can push for as much as we can possibly get and then draw it back and, have some tokens to trade. But the conversations are happening, which a couple of months ago they weren't, and or at least not to the level that they are at now. And I have a lot of optimism that we're going to get something that involves banking, protections for social equity businesses, as well as restorative justice measures across the finish line this year. Wow. It's going to be difficult, but I think it can happen.
Wow, I love your optimism. It always makes me feel better after I talk with you, Morgan. I really do. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to it.
Well, we just got to let people know to contact their lawmakers so that their lawmakers know that this is something that they actually care about.
Yeah, and I'm actually seeing polls showing more and more states favorably basically supporting legalization or at least decriminalization of the plant. So the movement hasn't gone backwards at all. It's moving forward and it's gaining more and more momentum. And this particular ruling, again, I think will eventually put a little more pressure on our lawmakers to actually get off vacation and get back to work. You get it, right? I know you get it.
I mean, I'm enjoying the break a little bit, but
I get it. I know. I appreciate it. Look, and everybody deserves it. It's the summertime, and it's been one of the hottest summers on record. At least they do recognize that there actually is a concern about climate change now. That being said, it still was a 50-50 split with the vice president making that vote to get that climate change bill passed. And I'm very discouraged about our system right now, but I also know it's the best one in the world. I'll be patient and I'll make it. We'll get through it. In the meantime, we're way past 4:20. Morgan, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to talking with you again next month, and bring that optimism with you. Will you please? I love that.
absolutely. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and it's always like, one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back, but things are heading in the right direction. It's victory is on the horizon. When it's going to happen, who knows? But we can't let up.
Right. Is that cannabis standard time? I think that's what it is. All right. Hey, Morgan, thank you. We're going to take our break. We're going to come back. We're going to continue this discussion with some of our regulars on this show and some people that haven't been on for a while. So don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I'd forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studios.
This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com.
Welcome back to the Green Rush. I'm your host today. I'm Josh Kincaid, host of the Talking Hedge, your cannabis business podcast. With me for the next couple of segments, Josh Krosny, director of cannabis events with MJH Life Sciences, and Meg LaRue. She's a group editorial director of cannabis science and technology, also with Cannabis Patient Care and MJH Life Sciences. Also with us, we've got three other guests. Riley Madler, she's the president of Riley Sunshine. Also, Janie Madler, she's managing partner and chief operating officer of Riley Sunshine. And Dr. Leah Sarah, she's the associate professor and program director, Master of Science in Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics with the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. Ladies, thanks for being with us. And Josh, thank you all.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Josh, do you want to jump in and because these are some of your guests, maybe introduce them? Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with Janie and Riley. These special ladies have been a part of my life for many, many years. And we touched a little bit earlier about pediatrics and the advocacy there and how that has been a part of my journey since the beginning. And knowing this family that you see right in front of you has been a big part of that. And I remember when Riley was yay high to the knee, and now she, has back then her mom was sharing her story, with her, but now she is a young adult and she's going out and sharing her own story. So I would love for you guys to just, maybe introduce yourself briefly and talk about how you got into the industry. And what the years have been like.
Okay. I'm Riley Madler. How I got into the industry, kind of. In second grade, I was diagnosed with aggressive giant cell granuloma bone tumors. And basically what they did is they ate away the majority of the bones in my face. And I was supposed to be deformed for the rest of my life, no teeth. And my mom, she was looking up certain options to help me with my pain because I had a lot of bone pain in my face, and cannabis kept popping up. So we decided to try it, and right away we saw good results in my pain and swelling. And only a few months later, we saw bone regeneration and tumor shrinkage. And so once I left the hospital, I asked my mom, why we have to hide the fact that I take my medicine, which is cannabis. And she told me it was illegal. So I was like, why don't we change that? So I made medicinal cannabis for pediatrics legal in Delaware. I made my foundation, Riley Smile Foundation, and we've passed multiple laws within the state of Delaware to help widen access of medicinal cannabis.
Can
That's
I step
awesome.
in and just ask a question about how that happened? Do you think that CBD was the gateway towards that regulation? And can we blame Charlotte for that awareness?
I definitely think it probably helped, but
Yeah.
we were still facing a lot of stigma in Delaware. Like,
Yeah,
we got a
in
lot of-
Delaware, we lived in a place where there wasn't much education around it, and people in our state, like, it was legal, and most of the legislators, they were all just very against it. I think it just had to do with our region, and Yeah.
I think it took them relating to this little girl, like begging for her life, for them to like break down those walls
Yeah.
and actually like look into it. And they gave us a lot of
yeah,
questions.
I talked to each legislator separately.
Yeah, I definitely think that Charlotte like helped.
Oh, definitely,
and
yeah.
to at least soften that wall that had to
Mhm.
come down. She did definitely helped it.
Yeah.
So Riley, why was it so important to you after, going through this and helping to change laws? Why was it so important for you to use your voice, and travel the world and speak to others and, not just in the cannabis industry, but also in different governments and in different settings? Like, why was it important for you to not only get the help you needed, but to also use your voice to try to help others?
Ever since I was little, once I left the hospital, I had almost like survivor's guilt where like I felt like it was unfair that I was better and I knew about cannabis and I took it. And that other patients in the hospital, they couldn't, their families didn't know about it. So that's why I made my foundation to help educate families all around the world. And through that, through you, I started being able to speak by myself. And I just started speaking in as many places as I could because I realized that it's so important for doctors everywhere to know how important cannabis is as a medicine. And I just made it my goal to help as many kids and people in general as I can.
You're such an amazing speaker, Riley. I heard you talk in May at CSC West, and I was like in tears over everything you were saying.
Thank you.
Your talks are really incredible. Could you share a little bit about what you're planning to present at CSC East in a couple weeks?
Yeah, so my presentation, my main goal is to like give the audience a good idea of like how much medicinal cannabis greatly impacts pediatrics and why we must advocate for all pediatrics to have legal access to medicinal cannabis.
That's great. And Janie, you're giving a talk as well, right? Can you share what you'll be saying?
Yeah, I'm in the psychedelic section, and what we have found is even in states that, you know, where cannabis is illegal or psilocybin is illegal, parents are still reaching out to us asking, like, how do I do this? How do I maneuver getting this for my child? Because we've tried everything on earth. And so we came to the conclusion that whether or not it's legal, parents are going to use it, but they're not going to reach out for help. So the main point of my talk is just to identify like what psychedelics are kind of popular and out there, what they look like, and some harm reduction. And a little of that will be kind of like a show and tell thing of like, this is what they look like. This is how people usually prepare them. Because families fall victim very quickly to other people who are supposedly growers, cultivators, and don't have the best intentions. So we just want to arm patients and families with like how to identify how it's supposed to be prepared and some of the harm reduction techniques.
So Janie, do you see that like different from cannabis, how like most people in their life had some type of experience or at least exposure to it? I would imagine with psychedelics, a lot of people, it's probably their first time even thinking about it, let alone seeing it or being in the same room with it. So are you seeing a big difference there from kind of the knowledge going into it, even if that knowledge is basic, like a lot of people have cannabis, compared to the psychedelic industry?
Yeah, it seems like with cannabis, people want to know, like, how is this working? Is this dangerous? Is it going to interact with my other medicines or my child's chemotherapy? And we have to like really dig deep and get down to the nitty gritty of like educating parents. And it seems like with psilocybin, they're just like, how can I get access? They have no more questions. Like, you know, how can I get access? How much should I use? And there's no questions about like, you know, how does this work or will this interact? And it's quite different. And I don't know why that is, but like we have a family that we're working with right now, and you know, trying different types of phenotypes for their daughter who suffers from like really severe OCD and autism. And their older son told them that they should use, you know, psilocybin for their daughter. And like, it's a really good idea. And when the mom told me that, she was scared to ask me at first. And then I was just surprised because I couldn't imagine telling my parents, hey, give little brother some psilocybin, he'll be fine. You know, it just wouldn't have crossed my mind to you know, communicate that to my parents.
Yeah, definitely. So Dr. Sarah, I want to get you involved too here. You're speaking, I think, in the psychedelics track as well. Do you want to share a little bit about your background and what you're doing there in the psychedelics realm?
Sure, and I just want to say hi to Riley and Janie as well. They spoke last spring at our symposium. Hopefully they'll be willing to come back and speak to another class next spring. And it's wonderful. You're inspirational wherever you go. So I'm excited to be sharing this screen space with you today, and to be speaking alongside you guys at CSC West. So I'm also speaking in the psychedelic track along with two of my colleagues, Dr. Chad Johnson and Dr. Andy Koop. We all teach in the Master of Science in Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics program. But what we're talking about at this at the CSC is psychedelics. You know, like many people, we've really been interested and reading increasingly about this resurgence in interest in psychedelics as medicine. And because our perspective on cannabis as medicine has always been that it is medicine, and that is how we want to approach it and how we teach it, that, you know, it's no more or less special than other medicines, you know, and that what makes it different is history and politics, right? That's the difference, but it's still medicine. And so we have seen that there are lots of wonderful talks in the psychedelic track. And so as the keynote, we really hope to give an overview of a little bit of the history. Dr. Koop and Dr. Johnson are going to talk about the pharmacology and some of the medicinal chemistry of some of these psychedelic compounds. I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that's been going on. And we really hope to kind of open up the psychedelic track to get people excited about all of the other talks that'll be happening in that track later in the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Sarah, I'd love to get your thoughts on, you know, the difference between the burgeoning psychedelics industry compared to the cannabis industry, because what I feel like we're seeing in psychedelics is a lot more clinical research based approach compared to cannabis, which has largely been an advocacy based approach going back to the 90s in California with Prop 215. So it seems like we kind of saw a little bit of this conversation with psychedelics when we went in to hibernation for COVID, but then it feels like we came out and it's just so much has developed and popped up all over the place, from ketamine to psilocybin to DMT, and just research is being done, you know, across the board. So what do you see just from, you know, your standpoint in the academic space of the differences in those, you know, kind of starts, and, you know, maybe where you see the psychedelic industry coming, and if you think that'll happen faster for us now than it did and still happening for cannabis?
Well, I think in some ways it will, because there are we're looking at multiple, you know, agents and multiple compounds, some of which are already, you know, FDA approved for some, you know, treatment purposes like ketamine. So while, you know, there's still things like psilocybin and LSD and MDMA may have a little bit further to go in terms of their acceptance in the medical community, we are seeing, I agree, a more research focused approach as opposed to seeing advocacy and industry preceding the research, which is what we've really seen with cannabis, which is what makes it such an interesting and challenging space to navigate from, you know, a medical and regulatory perspective. So I agree, it is different. But I'm really encouraged by the interest in research, and the fact that big research institutions like Hopkins and are starting to do this research, and NIH is starting to fund this research. I think we'll see a big explosion in what we know about these different agents and how they can treat different conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I've just recently started digging more and more into some of the details about some of the research going on and talking with some of the researchers, and, you know, some of the psilocybin research that's going on out there. I mean, at least I was surprised to find out kind of the dosing protocols that are being used. And, you know, one of the researchers I was talking to said, you know, comparatively, 5 to 5.5 grams of dried psilocybin from mushrooms. And obviously, when I say comparatively, we're working with synthetic psilocybin right now and most of the research capacities. But for me, you know, without saying too much, you know, for those of us who have been on journeys, and you can think of, you know, putting 5.5 grams down the hatch, it just kind of makes you go, whoa, you know what I mean? So I thought that was really interesting, because I'm thinking, you know, I'm sure they're microdosing, and it's like, you know, people sign up, they go in, and it's like, is it really worth it to go to, you know, the institution every day to do this? But then when you find out they're actually going in there and having, you know, a real journey, it's interesting.
Right. It is interesting, and I think it's important to, to also say that this is not, these are all really controlled environments when we talk about, dosing and large doses and these experiences. It's not just the compound itself. It goes along with a very strictly controlled, psychotherapy and a controlled environment, and someone who is assisting the person to make sure that they are safe, they feel safe, and that it's not just someone doing this on their own. And so I think that's important to point that out when we think about how do we apply what we learn in research to what people might actually, do at home, especially, in self-treating. And obviously, with cannabis, we know that there's lots of self-treatment. So self-treating with psychedelics may or may not, be equivalent, and I think it's important to state that.
Mhm. What about brain health? Riley said just a few minutes ago about the cancers in her brain. Wondering about, so we already know that MDMA and all of these other available drugs can help with depression and other ailments in the brain. There's a patent 6630507, I think, for the neuroprotectant that the government has with cannabis specifically. How does cannabis affect brain health? And is there a difference in applications, like smoking it versus consuming an edible, for example?
So, there are a lot of different compounds in cannabis, and I will say that what the research says about the long-term effects of cannabis can be, again, it can be hard to apply what a lot of the research says about cannabis, which typically looks at cannabis being used recreationally or cannabis being abused, and apply that to a medical model. We don't have a lot of observational data on the long-term effects on the brain of people who are using cannabis medically, as opposed to people who are using it recreationally, or people who are being treated for substance abuse. So it can be hard to say, to parse that out in terms of medical cannabis versus adult use.
Riley and Janie, do you guys want to jump in there as well?
Yeah. So I had bone tumors, but so I've had like 9 years of MRIs, and my brain has developed greatly, especially because I also have epilepsy. I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier, but 10 days after one of my procedures, I started having seizures. And my brain looks great for having epilepsy also, because cannabis helps me control my seizures. And I'm a straight A student. So I think, if anything, it's definitely helped me. I wouldn't be in school if it hadn't been for cannabis.
Well, you're a straight A student, you have a job, you are in all the plays at school, and you're always active in all the activities. So for me, you're a living example of the opposite of the stereotype of what people think of this plant, that you're just, sitting there, staying on the couch, eating potato chips. Because anytime I see you, you're active, you're going to the beach, you're hanging with your friends, you're working, or in Greece. We were talking about Olivia a little earlier, and I know she loved that you were in Greece at school. So I think it's great that you're breaking those stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really think, like, when we originally passed the first law that they named after her, that was the convincing moment, is when the senators looked at all of her medical reports, and then she, being like 8, I think you were 8 years old when we first talked to them. Yeah. And then she starts pulling out all of her report cards, and she so they're looking at all of her report cards, and you can see a huge difference of, like, there was one year that it was before we had started the cannabis, and she was in pain, and her grades
weren't good. Yeah,
because she's in pain, and you cannot.
I couldn't focus in school.
Yeah. So, and we showed them that, like, this is before cannabis, this is afterwards. And look at these grades. They went from like B's to like A+, honor roll, like everything you could think of. And she was receiving all these awards for, doing these state testing.
That's fantastic. And then again, like I said, you're just, breaking those stereotypes. And, I know personally from knowing you guys that a lot of the minds you've changed, it's been reaching across the aisle. It's been, the left, the right, and everyone in between. And, you've made believers out of people that were not believers. And I've seen it happen right in front of my eyes. So I think it's amazing the power that you both have with sharing your story.
Are you guys just using THC, or are there other cannabinoids? There was some talk about using CBD in the treatment of behavioral problems with children like autism, ADHD that we mentioned. I use CBD to help me with my smoking cravings. My guilty pleasure is a blunt. I'm not saying it's the right thing. I'm just saying that's my guilty pleasure. And I don't want to smoke a blunt during the day. So to kind of push that off, I use CBD, and it kind of helps me with my smoking cravings. Is there any other unknowns out there where it kind of helped, where you kind of scratch your head and go, I didn't even think about that?
Well, we had I hope this is answering your question. We had an instance. So when she first started on the cannabis, she was taking high THC, high CBD. And then when she developed epilepsy, we switched out not all, but most of the THC with THCA. And I used to, fill her little capsules up, before school. And her brother has autism, and he had therapists and everything. And one day he picked up her THCA pills and ate them, because that was just something he would do. You couldn't leave things laying around like that. And that day, his one-on-one therapist called us and asked us if he was on any new medication, because he would respond to the teacher appropriately. He raised his hand to answer, which he hadn't done in like 5 years. And that was like let's try that again, And so that, he started on his journey being a medical cannabis patient as well. And so those are some of those moments that you accidentally stumble upon something. And I don't think that the THCA and CBGA, I don't think they're given enough credit, because, people, they want pain, more pain relief. But like some of the most amazing things I've seen is somebody being doubled over with GI distress, giving them some THCA or some CBDA, and, half an hour later, it's like as if it never happened. So there's a lot of aha moments that we have throughout the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, and there's still so much research that's going on.
Well, I know that you guys have the farm where you guys are now hemp farmers. Add that to the resume. I would love to get your thoughts on, obviously we saw the farm bill pass, and I always say that was like a double-edged sword, because it kind of opened up access, but it also kind of created a lot of situations where we see CBD in gas stations and, all crazy places like that. So could you share a little bit about cultivating, producing and distributing CBD and hemp with good intention, and some of the challenges and things that people need to think about and look out for when you do go into the grocery store or the gas station and you see something there, and what are some of the things people should be looking out for, since we are seeing this widespread distribution of CBD because of the farm bill?
Sure. So I've noticed a lot of medicines that are sold in random gas stations or stores, like you mentioned, a lot of times they have fake labels on them showing what's supposed to be in the medicine. And then there was this one time where there was a QR code on the label that my mom saw, and she scanned the QR code. Most people just look at it and be like, oh, it's fine. She scanned the QR code and it was a totally different lab report than what was originally on the bottle. So a lot of people try to show a different sort of medicine that's not actually what it is, just to make money and make people feel like it's safe. A lot of companies, they process their oil terribly, and there ends up being alcohol in the medicine or mold. And I've experienced that as a patient, along with a lot of other people, I'm sure. And so that's a huge problem, just companies deceiving people, just trying to get money.
Yeah. And then with the farming, a lot of we learned this too. Before it's a lot of work. Before we got into farming, we knew that you have to have transparency, and you have to have lab reports and really dissect whatever it is you're putting in your body. Some of the things that we learned was, you should always test your soil and your irrigation water before you even put the first seed into the ground.
Hemp soaks up whatever is in the soil.
Yeah. So, and when it was interesting because when we sent all of our soil samples and irrigation samples, we sent it to Waypoint Analytical, and when all the results came back, I called the lab tech because I didn't understand the report, and I wanted to make sure that it was safe and it was okay and we could proceed with our plans, or sell the land, just defend it. And he was able to explain everything to me, and he said, "You're the first person who's ever called me this, concerned and wanting to understand it." He said most people will not even do this lab. They'll wonder where the metal came from in their flour, and they'll still sell it. They just won't tell people that metal showed up. They'll sell it for a little less. And that was like, still, even though I already knew people did this, it still shocked me that there were actually like farmers out there that wouldn't test their soil. And then when something pops up in their flour, they're like, "Oh, I don't know where that came from. It must be a mistake. I'm gonna sell it anyway." And so we've run across that a lot also with farming. Like, just the whole process is so important to make sure that every step of the way you're checking things, watching for mold, checking your plants. I mean, there's like so much into it, so many different layers before it even gets to the bottle. And another thing that we learned was by visiting dispensaries, a lot of dispensaries, all of their medicines have no terpenes. They add the terpenes later, and I've always like wondered why. You could just extract the terpenes. In processing ourselves, we learned why. It takes longer and it's more expensive. So the process is, you grind your flour, you put your bags in, and you extract the terpenes, and then you take it back out, and then you have to decarb and put it back in. So it's really almost like a triple step compared to just running it for isolates and selling. So there, we just learned a lot of the steps and the care that it takes. And then once you learn all that, you start looking around at all the other farmers and kind of scrutinizing them a little bit, you know?
Well, especially when you're spending more money to do it the right way and to produce, quality, it can be frustrating, I'm sure, seeing.
Yeah. So we do go with, like, even when we get, we sell online, but even when we get emails, like, I mean, sometimes we probably give them too much information because they'll ask me like one little 4-word question and I send them 4 paragraphs back, Yeah. But like, it's just so important to educate the consumer as like, this is the process. And you even want to see that lab, because we've heard of a lab that's 20 miles from us that has like, when they went to get trained, certified in CO2 extraction, the instructor left because there's rat droppings all over the place. And this is a place that I've seen on the news, and I was just like, oh wow, competition, but now I know that they're not.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you talked a lot about the science and the testing, so I'd like to segue back to Dr. Sarah. And you are one of the co-chairs of the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy's Masters in Science, Cannabis Science and Therapeutics program. So could you share with the viewers just a little bit about that program? And I believe you guys are enrolling currently, so maybe also share how people could learn more or even sign up if they were interested.
Sure, absolutely. This is a 2-year part-time Master of Science program. It is primarily online, although we do have students come to our campus in Rockville, Maryland, once per semester, so 4 times total over a period of 2 years. And this is a comprehensive program really focused on the science, so the pharmacology, the pharmaceutical science, the medicinal chemistry related to cannabinoids and cannabis medicine, what we know in terms of medical evidence, how to interpret medical evidence, how to apply that to patients in different medical conditions, the policies, health policy and advocacy related to, all related to medical cannabis. So students have opportunity to take a lot of different electives to really make this, an individually focused degree. And we've got a really diverse group of students, in terms of their academic and professional backgrounds. We do have clinicians who are in our program, so nurses, pharmacists. We have basic scientists, so microbiologists and chemists, and we have a lot of people with no science or medical background. So patient advocates, a lot of entrepreneurs and business professionals, public health professionals, and we really want to encourage that diverse group. We think it makes a really rich experience for us as faculty and hopefully for our students as well. We really promote a lot of professional development and networking and career development while they're in the program. We are accepting applications for fall of 2023. We've just started our fall 2022 semester with 180 new students. And so our application cycle is open for fall of 2023. The only requirement for enrollment in the program is a bachelor's degree. It doesn't need to be in a specific topic. In terms of the science, we teach it all from the ground up. And letters of recommendation and a personal statement are things that we really highly value when we're looking at applications. The website is pharmacy.umaryland.edu. You can get to our program from there, and I highly encourage, if you're interested, to check it out.
And how about you guys, Riley, Janie, where can they find you guys at?
So I have a foundation website, which is the RileySmileFoundation.org. And my oil company also has a website, RileySunshine.com. And I also have an Instagram, hi.achievingkid, but hi is spelled H-I. And yeah, that's where you could reach me. I also have a Facebook account.
We can find you all over the place. All right, we're going to run to a commercial break. Josh and Meg, they're going to stick around, come back with us for another panel. So I want to thank my guest, Dr. Leah Serra. She, again, Associate Professor, Program Director, Master of Science in Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, as well as Riley and Janie Maedler with Riley Sunshine. Appreciate all of y'all for coming with us. Thanks again. And we're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come right back.
So I think there's one very important difference between me and most of my team members and other cannabis accounting firms, especially outsourced cannabis accounting firms. With a lot of the other firms, you're going to find bookkeepers or folks that were accountants for their entire career, but they were junior accountants. I've spent most of my career alongside CFOs at public companies with thousands of employees, public companies. So much of my career wasn't spent in the debits and credits. It was spent with the CFO, CEO, COO of large public companies, working on strategy, working on planning and big initiatives, working on projects such as mergers and integrations. So that high level experience, along with being able to do the debits and credits and having members of my team that also have fairly senior experience and also members of the team that are junior and can do the bookkeeping at a little bit lower cost than some of the people with the experience, gives our clients a much broader depth of experience than a lot of the other firms where you're hiring someone that is just a bookkeeper and can't help with the strategy side of it, or someone that's been an executive for a long time and can only help with the strategy but can't help with the hands-on.
Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
You know, every week I start off this show when I'm hosting. Thank God it's Friday. Sometimes that really, really fits. Okay. Sometimes it doesn't. But in this particular case, it definitely does. It's been a long week. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and today's host of Green Rush Live. You know, one of the nation's longest running live business talk shows all about the cannabis industry. We've been doing this now for over a year on Fridays, and we're always so proud to have a great group of guests that join us to chit chat about what is going on in the world of cannabis business. Well, we've got one here today. His name is Morris Beagle, and he's a return guest. That's right. He's a return guest because he's been with us before. I'm pretty sure, Morris, you were involved with our program that we called Cannabis Chat back in the day, in the fall of 2020. Does that sound accurate? Just go along with it.
Yeah,
Just-
I'm pretty sure. And I think I was on your In the Weeds with Jimmy Young as well.
It's that Jimmy Young show again. Yeah, within the
It
weeds.
is.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. And I know he would too. All right. So let's give you a little intro. Let me tell you who you are, just in case you didn't know. You are the Hemp King. What do you think?
I don't know about that, but
All
I'm
right,
in the
all
hemp
right.
industry.
All right. You are the president and co-founder of We Are for Better Alternatives, WAFBA, the
WAFBA.
co-founder and producer of the Southern Hemp Expo, the NOCO Hemp Expo, and you are also a podcast host and publisher of Let's Talk Hemp. Did I get them all?
And we've got Silver Mountain Hemp Guitars, which is right behind me.
Yeah, I noticed quite a few guitars there. Maybe before you leave, you might give us a little riff, you know, maybe going out to the break at the end of the half hour. Is that something you'd be willing to do?
We'll have to see. I pulled a guitar over here, but it's out of tune. I'm getting ready to, this is made out of industrial hemp right here.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Let me ask you, are all the things that you wear and do made out of hemp?
Often, but unfortunately this shirt is not and this hat is not, but I did have a hemp shirt and hat on yesterday. I should have worn it for today's episode, but I didn't. I was just feeling rock and roll here.
Right. I get it. Rock and roll and weed go hand in hand. That's the way I look at it. You know, I do want to ask you, you have an event coming up. I want to make sure we talk about it right off the top because it's in Nashville, Tennessee. And with the guitars behind you, I'm really going out on a limb thinking that music played a role in this, or was Nashville picked for another reason?
No, it played a role because I come from the music industry, and when I started NOCO Hemp Expo, it's like Colorado's a great place, and where else can I have cool expos and conferences? And Nashville, which I had participated in my music business days, it's like Nashville's a great place. They've also got a good hemp scene and a good hemp program, and they're welcoming to the hemp industry. And then we've also done Hawaii as well. So it's like Colorado, Nashville, Hawaii. Those were kind of where we planted our initial flags.
There you go. And the hemp world has been in the news more lately, and it's no fault of the industry. I want to make sure you hear that right away from me, because I don't approve of what's been going on in Washington, D.C. about a lot of things, but particularly of trying to figure out how to regulate the hemp industry. And there's been a lot of controversy as you look at the issues about the FDA and infusion, about Delta 8 now being derived from hemp. What are some of the biggest challenges that you think the industry faces?
Well, getting it regulated by the FDA has been probably the biggest challenge that we've had. And I think it was pretty clear when we passed the Farm Bill in 2018 that Trump signed Not that he had anything to do with it, because he really didn't. And it's not like Trump was supporting industrial hemp. He just signed the farm bill that happened to federally legalize industrial hemp in all parts of the plant, all derivatives, all cannabinoids. And what that did was it threw the ball into the FDA's court, where they should have regulated CBD as a dietary supplement and a food and beverage additive. And that is yet to happen. And because of this, it's affected the revenue of our industry and the investment in our industry by billions and billions and billions of dollars. And it also has created this new channel of synthesized cannabinoids, including Delta 8, THCO, HHC, and all these other letters that are coming out. It's like, where the hell did all this stuff come from? I don't even know what you're talking about. And that was never it really wasn't the intent of the hemp industry to have all of these now synthesized derivatives that are intoxicating. But are they legal? Well, we're getting rulings around the country in different states. And so, you know what? This is legal. And it's like, it just makes it more complicated for fiber and grain, so we can build hemp guitars and build houses and make bioplastics and have good nutritious food and superfoods and so forth. All of a sudden now we're dealing with all the synthesized cannabinoids that get you intoxicated, and the marijuana industry doesn't like that. And so big cannabis has been throwing crap all over the hemp industry, because it's like, hey, that's our space, you can't do that. Oh, now you've got Delta 9 derived hemp products that have 5 milligrams and 10 milligrams. That's too much. And they're pissing all over us, and we don't like that. And so it's just creating all this controversy and divisiveness between us. And it's like, man, this sucks.
Yeah. It's tough to be in that industry when you really don't know what the rules are, right?
Right. It's like Wild West here. And I got into it because I want to make hemp t-shirts and hemp paper and build houses and hemp guitars and have good hemp superfoods, and we could have food for animals, and we can have dietary supplements that are very healthy and nutritious that we should be taking to help regulate our endocannabinoid system. But here we are, and I do throw the blame primarily on the FDA. The FDA has dropped the ball, and a lot of it, I don't know if they've dropped the ball or they're just saying, hey, pharmaceutical industry, we're doing your bidding, and we know we just want to kick the can down the road, and you guys position yourselves so you can control cannabinoids like you really want to. And then you've got big food out there, corn and soy, that's like, hey, put the brakes on. We don't want to have animal feed made from industrial hemp, even though that's generally recognized as safe. It's great human food, but yet we don't know if animals should eat it or not because there's not enough studies done. It's like, that is absolute total bullshit.
Right. Well, that's good. I knew that that's exactly the word you should be using, by the way.
It's bullshit. And it's the FDA, and they can go F themselves.
Yes. All right. I get it. Yes. And so let me ask you, this is an interesting question as you're talking about all these challenges that are and delays being caused by federal organizations. You think that's on purpose?
Yes, I do. And I don't think it's a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. I think it's their thing.
They're all guilty. I will definitely remember here in Massachusetts when the adult use bill, question passed the ballot box in 2016, and our Republican governor, even though we're a pretty liberal state in Massachusetts, Governor Charlie Baker said, let's take our time here. Let's make sure we crawl before we walk, before we run, which, by the way, is okay. I get that. And he did appoint the right people, or at least a group of people that put out these regulations from scratch. And we have a vibrant market for both cannabis and hemp here in Massachusetts. However, it's that delay tactic. And to me, this is an injustice. This is not fair. This is not fair to the people that have put their money in. This is not fair to the farmers who then, I can't tell you how many times I've heard farmers complain that they've got all this hemp and they don't know what to do with it now.
Right. Well, what they've done with it is they've shifted it over to folks who then turn it into Delta 8. And I think that that's good, because it's like we don't want to screw the farmers, and the farmers have a bad taste in their mouth because of this. And now that we want to grow fiber and grain, there's just a lot of people that don't want to be in the hemp industry because of these delay tactics that have happened. And again, I throw it back on the FDA, and there's other players involved there behind them, pharmaceutical industry, big food, and I'm sure there's others that we're not even sure who it is. Big cannabis as well. But
let me ask you a question. Shouldn't hemp be regulated by the U.S. Agricultural Division rather than the FDA?
Well, it is from a growing standpoint, and the USDA has really, they're actually, I'm not going to throw them under the bus at this point, because I think that they're trying to do the right thing. And the FDA has, these alphabet agencies don't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. And maybe there is stuff behind the scenes and that they do see eye to eye, and I'm just ignorant and naive to it on some of it. But they are trying to do things where they're trying to provide what they consider realistic regulations, which I don't think we're quite there yet. And hopefully with the new farm bill that'll be coming out next year, we make an adjustment from 0.3% to 1%. So we don't have to destroy any crops. Farmers have less risk there. But farmers shouldn't be having FBI checks. They shouldn't have to test this crop and spend thousands of dollars. Why would I want to grow hemp when I can grow corn and soy and wheat, and I don't have to jump through all these hoops and spend all this money and make less money? It's like, it should be very easy for them to grow this, because it should be a commodity crop that can go into all these different industries, whether that's the paper industry, the automotive industry, the textiles industry, the construction industry. And that's what we're growing it for. It shouldn't be different than any other crop.
Right. Aren't those the same industries, by the way, that prohibited cannabis back in 1937?
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I
Sorry.
know.
Look, to me, they are trying to do everything they can to make it as difficult as possible to have this industry. And I say this, and the plant is a cannabis plant. It's hemp, but it's a cannabis plant. And they're doing everything they possibly can to retard the launch, the growth of the industry. And I give the people that are in the industry a lot of credit, because they're not getting the return on the investment that they expected because of these delays, because of this bureaucracy in the federal government down in Washington, D.C. And again, I keep going back to it. It's unfair. I don't understand. I don't think these legislators, any legislature, but all of them, throw them all under the bus as far as I'm concerned, really understood what they were doing when they were passing that first farm bill, and didn't understand what a cannabinoid was from a cat, for crying out loud. They had no clue, right? And they just did. They were only concerned is, well, that one over there, that drug, it's a plant. That drug, gets you high. It gets you intoxicated. And then, of course, the scientists explain, well, that's true. However, it has hundreds of these little chemicals in it called cannabinoids. And you don't actually have to have a lot of THC to create a good cannabinoid like a CBD or a CBN or a CBG and actually build an industry around it. Right?
Exactly. For sure. No question.
So if I understand
Going back to it, they mission accomplished on their part for making it very difficult for this industry at this point.
Let me ask you a question. And I read 30 newsletters a week. I try to keep up on as much other news as possible about the industry and other industries. And I just wonder, how long can it last? I mean, how long can they sustain any growth, even if it's infinitesimal growth? And I don't mean about the amount of crops, but I mean actually building a business with getting better return on your investment, better return on your crops. They're doing an injustice to $1 billion industry.
Well, hundreds of billions of dollars. Whitney Economics, Bo Whitney, who I don't know if you've ever had on your show before.
Yes, we have. Yep.
And Bo's put out some great data about, if we had 2% of this industry, 5% of this industry, 3% of this, where we'd have a $350 billion industry of industries that we can put our materials right into and just take a sliver of. And all of a sudden, our industry is way bigger than the adult use industry. It's ridiculous. And none of it's intoxicating. All of it's health and wellness and environmentally eco-conscious materials that's going to green up almost any company that's out there that's trying to help their ESG rating moving forward. Which, and the ESG thing has got its own controversy, but it's a thing and it's going to continue to be a thing. And hemp can help with all of that.
Yeah, and I just don't know. And now because you've got Delta 8 out there, and by the way, if I remember correctly, Texas, okay, has Delta 8. Texas has Delta 8 legalized, right? So
correct.
So the politicians that were afraid of the other plant with that THC that gets you intoxicated, it completely backfired, because now in their state, okay, you could get a Delta 8 product and get high from it.
Right. And they just outlawed the smokable flower, at least growing it there, but they can still sell it there. I mean, and Delta 8 may not be legal today. That's the thing. They flip-flopped all over the place. I think that there's still stores selling it. They're not just selling CBD and full spectrum stuff. They're selling Delta 8 and HHC and all of the other derivatives, which you've got courts ruling different ways on this across the country. You got the Ninth Circuit Court saying, hey, it's legal. It's a derivative based on the Farm Bill, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay.
But the people that are making the rulings don't understand the chemistry.
Exactly.
So before they even talk about it, there needs to be some education. There needs to be, and look, in my soul, I'm an educator. I'm actually going back to teach again this fall, one night a week, and I'm really looking forward to it at Curry College. But I just don't understand how the elected officials, okay, that the people put in place are just not motivated to learn more. It's almost like a necessary evil weed for them to actually learn about, and they don't want to. And again, it goes back to the stigma of the other plant, right?
Well, agreed, but there are some legislators out there and government officials that do care and have been advocates for this, particularly our governor, Jared Polis, here in Colorado.
Yep.
And while not everybody agrees with some of his positions, I give credit to Jared for understanding both sides of the plant, or all sides of the plant, and doing a good job as being a navigator and working with the legislators, working with all the stakeholders on the hemp side, the cannabis side, and we all don't agree, but he understands. He's a smart guy, and he's taken the time to understand. And there's other guys in Oregon, and there's different people out there that do it, but they're an anomaly in our system.
I'm not sure you saw the news item about the state of New Jersey.
What, is Chris Christie back?
No, that wasn't the news. Okay.
Okay.
It had to do with interstate commerce. Excuse me. Pardon me. I didn't mean to do that into the microphone. Okay. It had to do with interstate commerce, that they see an opportunity to do business with other states outside of the borders of New Jersey with hemp products and cannabis sativa products. And a lot of people, we've actually had a whole show on this within the last year. I'm going on a limb. I knew it was within the last year, on the fact that there's actually this clause that exists that one business law professor argues they can do interstate commerce right now, according to this clause that was back in the 1920s. It had something to do with the New York harbor and moving from New York to New Jersey on the water. And anyway, I wish I could spew all the little details that we had, but what effect is that going to have when the interstate commerce officially begins on that industry, on hemp?
Well,
you can do it now, can't you?
Yeah, we can do it now all over the place. When it happens with adult use cannabis, then it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Law enforcement needs to be educated. And I truly believe law enforcement doesn't want to waste their time on this. They know that this should be at the bottom of their food chain when it comes to dealing with the things that they need to deal with to make sure that they are proper peace officers and taking care of their communities. I don't want to throw cops under the bus. There's bad cops out there that are jerks, and they shouldn't be on the force.
And they're good ones, and they're
There's a-
good ones too.
There's a lot of good ones. I mean, the vast majority, but if you have 5% that are bad and you've got 1 million cops out there, that's 50,000 cops.
Right. Well, we do know that there's been some punishment to police officers over the last couple of years. So at least the justice system in that department is working. And I know we just passed the magic 420 time. So if you're out there watching and you'd like to partake, just tell me what state you're in. We already have Wisconsin and Alabama checking in on the chat room, which I think is wild. We usually have people from Arkansas and Washington State and all that. But let's get back to hemp. I'm going to make you the hemp czar.
The hemp czar. I would be a good hemp czar. I would be just, I would be fair, and I would work across all aisles. And there should be more than 2 aisles. That's another thing that's just crazy as F.
No,
I just say crazy as fuck, because there's multiple aisles, and there should be. That way we all come together and we share ideas. We don't have to agree on everything, but hopefully in the end we come to a reasonable conclusion and understanding, and we can proceed forward.
No, there's way too much finger pointing, middle finger pointing sometimes too, at both sides of the aisle. And just because one political party says one thing, the other political party thinks they're obligated to say the exact opposite. And our country is getting more and more split up. If you don't think we're having a cold civil war right now, you haven't been paying attention, right? And I just thought that America, the whole idea of America was to open up your mind, share your thoughts, don't be afraid of doing that, and find common ground with your neighbor who may not look like you. He may not even be in the same political party as you or the socioeconomic class. That's what this country has to do. And we're not doing it. And cannabis and hemp are perfect examples of it. It's very frustrating.
It is frustrating. And all I know is we are for better alternatives. And our platform is to bring diversity, bring a variety of different ideas together, all walks of life, whether you're straight, gay, bi, tri, Christian, Jew, atheist, Muslim, black, white, brown, green,
one
whatever.
Family of humanity.
Exactly. We are one we're all humans. We're all citizens of the earth. And can we just be respectful to each other? We don't have to agree on everything, but you know what? We all want to have families and take care of our own and just be kind.
It would be nice to just be kind. I agree with that too. We've got Oklahoma checking in now too. So I want to give you another chance to give a plug to your show coming up in Nashville, and how people down that way or can check it out online and see what's down there, and maybe take in some music and go to your hemp show. Give us another plug. Tell us how they can find out about it.
All right. We're going into the 4th annual Southern Hemp Expo in Nashville. It's next weekend. It's the 19th and the 20th of August. SouthernHempExpo.com. We've got a business conference on Friday. We've got a farm symposium on Saturday. We've got an expo hall that's open both days. Tons of vendors, all aspects of hemp, food, CBD, Delta 8, building materials, bioplastic, hemp guitars. And we've got live music. We've got food tastings. We've got lots of cool things going on. And we've got a great group of speakers coming out. And we've got an after party at the 5 Spot in East Nashville, live music, throwing down Nashville style. It's going to be a great time.
It is, and everybody's chomping at the bit to get out of their little pandemic hangover and get out and party again. And hopefully the heat has gone down a little bit in the South.
It's supposed to be 83 to 85 degrees during our show, which is fine. It's not 95 degrees. So we're looking at good weather next week.
Or more, it was actually in triple digits a lot down the South and for a long time. And now at least things are easing up a little bit. Hey, Morris Beagle, if they want to like sign up for your newsletter and follow you, how do they do that? Give yourself a plug.
Well, go to letstalkhemp.com. That's our media platform. You can find out about Southern Hemp Expo, NOCO Hemp Expo, everything that I'm doing. We've got a newsletter that goes out every week. We curate news from all over the world. We put out our own editorial content, and we try to keep people informed, not only about hemp, but happenings in cannabis as well.
Well, that is awesome. I wish you the best of luck. Hope you have a lot of success with your show down there. And I know you'll check in on a regular basis. You're welcome here, Morris, anytime you want to talk hemp.
All right. Well, thank you, Jimmy. You do an awesome job. Keep educating the masses on all sides of the plant, and keep strong. We're fighting the good fight.
I appreciate it. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to talk with two guys that are educators that are in colleges educating young people about the future of this industry. So don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com. Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It is everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
So I think there's one very important difference between me and most of my team members and other cannabis accounting firms, especially outsourced cannabis accounting firms. With a lot of the other firms, you're going to find bookkeepers or folks that were accountants for their entire career, but they were junior accountants. I've spent most of my career alongside CFOs at public companies with thousands of employees, public companies. So much of my career wasn't spent in the debits and credits. It was spent with the CFO, CEO, COO of large public companies, working on strategy, working on planning and big initiatives, working on projects such as mergers and integrations. So that high level experience, along with being able to do the debits and credits and having members of my team that also have fairly senior experience and also members of the team that are junior and can do the bookkeeping at a little bit lower cost than some of the people with the experience, gives our clients a much broader depth of experience than a lot of the other firms where you're hiring someone that is just a bookkeeper and can't help with the strategy side of it, or someone that's been an executive for a long time and can only help with the strategy, but can't help with the hands-on.
Oh my God. Welcome back to Green Rush Live for Friday afternoon here in Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. Very proud to have a live phone in Zoom call talk show on the business of cannabis every Friday here at Pro Cannabis Media on all those social media platforms that we're on, like your YouTube, your LinkedIn Live, your Facebook Meta, and Twitch. And did I forget one? Yes, Pro Cannabis Media, now streaming 24/7 live on our homepage. So you want to check that one out too. Josh Kincaid is with us from the left coast, and an old friend, David Rabinovitz, has joined us in here because he has been the champion for interstate commerce. And before David, before I pat you on the back, I'm patting you on the back. So see if you can control yourself, because I'd really like to welcome in our media guy, Zach Huffman from Grown In. It's a great newsletter. I read it on a regular basis. His beat is the New England area. And Zach, pleasure to meet you and welcome to Green Rush Live.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How did it come about? How did you end up with that gig with Grown In? And then we can give a plug a little bit for the other Grown In newsletters that are out there.
Sure. So, well, first I'll start with Grown In itself. I think they're going on like roughly 3 years now that they've been around.
Yep.
And for about the first 2 years of Grown In's existence, it primarily covered the Midwest, Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, and then Ohio. Last fall, they started expanding their coverage, and their first kind of step outside of the Midwest was New England. So I live in Massachusetts, so they were looking for a reporter who was local, and I got lucky. And so before then I had I've written for local papers in the Boston area. I wrote for Courthouse News for about 5 years, which is why I have no choice but to cover this main case.
Right.
And then for the last 10 years off and on, I've also written for Dig Boston. So alt
Gotcha.
media is kind of in my wheelhouse.
I gotcha. Well, alt media, I always came from traditional media, and now I'm part of the alt media, I guess, because we are just talking about cannabis 24/7 here. Walk us through this ruling by this circuit court and what implications it has, not only for the state of Maine, but perhaps for interstate commerce all over the United States.
Well, this this ruling starts with Maine's residency requirement. And so Maine, initially, they required that all owners, managers, basically anyone who can make a decision, whatever, it was kind of broadly defined in a company that either was providing medical or adult use had to be a resident of Maine. Now, before this current, lawsuit that we're talking about, the NGP or Wellness Connection, they had actually sued the state over the adult use residency requirement. And during that, and that was in federal court. And during that federal case, the state essentially reached a settlement saying, all right, we're just not going to enforce the residency requirement for adult use. And can we just drop this case? And that's what happened. And then, of course, a couple months later, they move on to the medical market. And so you have the same companies, Wellness Connection, who Wellness Connection is a locally owned, homegrown company in Maine. But Acreage wants to buy them. And so Acreage cannot buy them with this residency rule in place. So they sued again. And this time you had a patient activist group get involved that kind of helped push forward when the state may not have been willing to fight. I mean, that's just speculation. At the federal level, the judge ruled against the state, saying that this rule violates the Dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution. And that's kind of what was being appealed. So I don't know how much you've kind of discussed that aspect of it.
Oh yeah. Well, David will debrief because he's the one who found Robert Mikos, this Vanderbilt professor, who wrote a paper about it, got published, and David read it because David reads everything. David, I'm sure you have a few questions, some comments about this whole thing.
Well, no, I'm going to let Zach keep going because the article that I wrote back in April was a result of two things. It was Zach's coverage on, I believe, April 7th or April 8th of the case that was just decided. He covered the oral arguments and I think did a phenomenal job on that. And so I'm going to let Zach keep going. I think what I did built upon a lot of what he already had done. So I think I'm going to leave it to the expert here with the foundation.
Well, he's on the beat. That's for sure. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Zach.
I mean, you know, in case you couldn't tell, David and I have had several conversations about this topic in the past. So we are both very aware of where the other one stands. So, you know, the state lost at the federal level, and of course, they appealed with the support of this activist group. Sorry, the exact names are escaping me. So they appealed to the First Circuit. And then during those oral arguments, it definitely seemed like the panel, you know, they argue before at the First Circuit, you know, you argue your case before a panel of 3 judges. And it seemed like for the most part, they were taking the side of the company that this does, in fact, violate Dormant Commerce Clause. And the important distinction is it's easy to kind of look at this and say, oh, well, the Dormant Commerce Clause is supposed to regulate interstate commerce, you know, over commerce over state borders. That doesn't exist in cannabis because you can't, you know, bring weed over the border. What was argued by, you know, Acreage and Wellness Connection was that it wasn't cannabis that was being transferred over state lines, it was investment dollars. And so that's really what they were arguing, is that the investment market for cannabis was being unfairly restricted by this residency requirement. And the First Circuit seemed to agree, at least, you know, 2 out of the 3 panel judges.
Josh, I don't want to ignore you. If you've got some comments or questions for Zach or David, knock yourself out.
I'm actually curious about that area. Was the legalization process through a ballot measure, or was that done through legislation and not on a vote?
Adult use in Maine was a ballot measure.
It was a ballot measure. Okay. Are you seeing that being a difference? Because with a lot of ballot measures on the West Coast, there's a lot less corporate interests, right? Whereas some of these limited license states have a lot of influence from a very small amount of folks. And then that can really kind of change or dictate on how things are being done. So do you have a feeling that there's a lot of lobbyists being pushed behind this, or is this still kind of an open free market?
I mean, there's certainly, you know, lobbyist influence. It's kind of hard to tell what the difference is, you know, looking, you know, obviously my perspective is very much New England. And so I do have a mix of those versions, you know, like, or those varieties. Massachusetts and Maine were both legalized adult use through the ballot. But say Connecticut, Vermont, and Rhode Island did it through the legislature. It does seem like, for instance, in the case of Connecticut, that the way it's been legalized through the legislature has been a way that like very much benefits a very, you know, specific set of operators. So, you know, I guess in theory, there is more opportunity when it is ballot based. But at the same time, I mean, at least with Maine, although the legislature, I mean, not the legislature, although the voters legalized it in 2016, it took a while to be legalized because, of course, the next step is the legislature has to write the rules. And at the time, Maine had a governor named Paul LePage, who was a kind of one of the old school Tea Party candidates who came in that first wave against Obama, like I think 2010, maybe he got elected. He was very much anti-weed. And so he spent most of his time in the governor's office fighting any efforts from the legislature to fulfill the will of the voters. So it took a bit longer for Maine, and perhaps that gave more time for the legislature to kind of be more specific in how they're crafting this. But I mean, yeah, sorry.
David, from your standpoint in the bubble that you're sitting at on the East Coast, are you seeing the same thing where the ballot initiatives have maybe less influence versus there may be more protectionism is what I'm curious about from the legislative standpoint. If there's lobbyists and interested groups, they're not going to want to push for this interstate commerce because they're going to want protectionism. Are you seeing that?
I don't know if I'd say I'm seeing that, but obviously the MSOs the larger MSOs have money now. And if they have money, they're going to hire whatever you want to call it, advisors, attorneys. They're ultimately people who are going to be lobbying on their behalf, right? Versus the grassroots folks who are putting the questions are trying to get a much purer market with a lot more equity in it. So I'm not sure how I'd respond to that. I think that by the time legislation gets passed, the local advocacy groups are in the legislators' ears. Look what just happened in Massachusetts. It took 2 years, but the governor signed a bill that upended our regulatory structure, at least as to how municipalities grant the local approval, right? And it is much more leaning toward what the grassroots folks wanted than what the institutional municipalities wanted. So I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer your question, but I don't know that there's outsized influence one way or the other, whether it's legislatively created or done at the ballot box by voter initiative.
Zach, I'm sure you know Shalene Title, the former commissioner, right?
Yep.
She's obviously concerned what this ruling might be, what effect it might have on social equity applicants. How's your read on that?
I mean, there's certainly a possibility that this could have a negative impact on social equity applicants. I think the important thing to remember, though, with this ruling is this isn't a ruling that's changing anything like from one day to the next. You know, like now that it's been ruled that the Dormant Commerce Clause can regulate weed, it doesn't mean tomorrow you're going to have trafficking over the state border. There's a lot of other dominoes that have to fall.
Right.
And it's possible this could lead towards more legal battles against social equity status, but you know, they'll have to be initiated, you know?
Yeah. I think Mikos was quoted in an article yesterday, and that's what he pointed out is if you can't restrict out of state parties in favor of in-state parties, does that mean that a lot of the in-state social equity programs could be challenged on the grounds that in Massachusetts, home delivery and social consumption licenses are exclusively available to social equity folks. And to qualify for social equity, you have to be a Mass resident. So that means that an out-of-stater can't get those licenses. I'm not sure how that all falls out. That's way above my research grade. And frankly, I'm not that focused on it, really. I can't see them saying, well, we're going to cut. First off, a case is going to have to go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to say, we don't want any more affirmative action type stuff, even in cannabis. And I'm not sure how far they're going to go.
Isn't the Supreme Court saying, don't put any more cannabis cases in front of us, please?
I mean, other than Clarence Thomas, I think that's where they're going. But
right, they don't want to have to deal with it.
Look, this is not far, Jimmy, from what you've heard out of my mouth for the past year, which is I don't think that Washington, D.C. is going to do anything for cannabis. I don't think they can get out of their own way. Even the people that are pro-cannabis don't understand the market, which is why their bills come out and the industry craps all over them. I mean, I believe for a while, and I said it back in April, marijuana legalization in the United States is going to get handled by the courts. And when the right case goes to the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas has pretty much already said, I think he's going to come down under the 12th Amendment of equal protection and say, you can't allow one group that's got money and more white guys in it to be dealing in cannabis and then go after poor street dealers who are people of color and lock them up for the same thing. Right? Not equal protection under the law. You either enforce it and say marijuana is illegal, or you say it ain't illegal and you step away from it.
Yeah. I mean, and that, do you think, again, I just had Morgan Fox on, and everybody knows I get very frustrated about the political divide that is in our U.S. Senate right now, because I can't, we're not governing. They're not governing. They're staying elected. And that is wrong. And now the Supreme Court has become politicized. So there's two branches right there, guys, that I'm a little concerned about, right? Or at least 1.5 branches. But where Where's this going to go, Zach? What do you think will be the implications of this? Or is it really almost symbolic that something's wrong here? It is a shot across the bow. The industry is going to glom onto this and saying, look, interstate commerce is coming, whether you guys legalize this or not. It's here. We're going to fight it forever. Where do you think we're going to go with that?
I mean, I think there's certain, if we're looking at an end game of legalization, right? I feel like there's a number of different paths. You have more and more states that are willing to legalize. That's going to increase it. That's going to increase the palatability of it as an issue, I think. I don't see a solution in the U.S. Senate anytime soon. But I do also think a lot of the progress we're gonna see will be done through the courts. I mean, there's a lot of creative lawyers. And that's really what it takes. Get a creative lawyer, find your case, and you can, chip away at prohibition that way.
How much of these companies are going to be losing out in the meantime, though? Because anytime you have investors sitting on the sideline waiting for volatility to calm down, waiting for uncertainty to figure itself out, you're wasting a lot of time and a lot of opportunities. First mover advantages are moving away. Time value of money is being diminished. And so, I just talked to an investor earlier today who was talking about these social justice warriors going out there and trying to get everything they want. And I'm all for social equity. I think there's been a lot of damage with the war on drugs with minorities. But at the same time, the virtue signaling in politics with bureaucrats who really don't care except for the pennies that they earn. It seems like they're just moving from one side to another, one topic to another, talking one side of their mouth, and not really doing anything. I don't see action. I just see virtue signaling from bureaucrats. So in the meantime, you have all of these people who actually need something to move. All of these entrepreneurs, business people, people of color that want to get into the industry. Are we actually going to do something? Or are we just going to sit here and destroy the potential investment opportunities that these folks have?
Josh, do you think that that's something that needs to be done at the federal level or the state level?
I think it needs to be something done at the state level and have the feds just get out of the way.
I mean, you got to look at viability. Federal's not going to do it. State seems to be willing in some cases.
Right.
Massachusetts just passed the law I was mentioning earlier. They're going to direct, I think it's 15% of the tax revenue into a separate fund where they will provide either grants or loans to social equity applicants who are trying to get into the business. I mean, I think that's going to be huge. I spoke to a social equity applicant the other day. He was all excited about it. I tried to temper his enthusiasm with, this isn't going to happen until next spring because they're not putting money up. They're saying take money out of sales tax revenue. And it's going to take a while before that gets funded in any meaningful way. Plus they got to get whatever institution is going to pass this money out. They have to put that together, recruit board members, decide whether they're only funding full operations or they're going to give people exploratory grants or that type of thing. But I think that's at the state level. I think that's what's going to solve the problem you're referring to of getting social equity folks standing up in the business. I think the feds are only going to be in the way.
Hey, Zach, I want to ask you about your beat. How many of these meetings, New England's it's a pretty big territory. You're traveling all over from Augusta to Boston to Hartford. I mean, how do you get around to cover all these states?
Well, I will say I am, one of the fortunate repercussions of, COVID is that everyone does their meetings remotely. So that's how I'm able to kind of keep up.
Hasn't that helped? Wait, hang on a second. Hasn't Zoom helped news gathering?
I think it has to some extent.
Yeah.
It's, in the perfect world, if I could travel all the time, I mean, being in person is always going to be a little better, but this absolutely has increased, access to public meetings. And that aspect I think has been huge. I've been able to cover meetings in, the meetings I've regularly followed where, I've done the main medical work group meetings, obviously Mass CCC over in Worcester. I'm in the South Shore of Massachusetts. So even that will be a little bit of Vermont's meetings I cover, Connecticut Social Equity Council. Most of the actual travel I might do is just visiting grow sites, to be honest.
Why grow sites and not dispensaries, Zach?
Well, I go to dispensaries,
Oh, okay.
but not officially.
I get, no, I understand. I know, I understand. So let me ask you a question about as a media member, how much of your time is on digging or as opposed to regurgitating what's at these meetings?
I mean, it's a mix. I mean, covering the meeting is always a good way to capture information that everyone's following, but I spend most of my day digging. I mean, there's only so many articles I have to write. And that's especially the case now. Grown In recently kind of shifted its format. For the longest time, we had, or at least for the last year, for the most part, we had separate newsletters for regions. We had a Midwest, New England, and then we had a Mid-Atlantic newsletter. We've kind of done away with that. And now we just have the general Grown In newsletter Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where between me and Mike Forche, my editor, we write more in-depth columns. So, yeah, I mean, we're not following the day-to-day meetings as much, but yeah, it's a lot of digging now.
What is the best way, Zach, that you're able to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of the industry to either adapt or pivot to stay relevant?
I think part of it is one thing that actually really helps us, if you look at our newsletter, is in every edition, we have aggregation of local news. Mm-hmm. So we'll just look at what the news stories are that involve cannabis for the last week in our different regions. And honestly, just gathering that kind of keeps me up to speed. I keep my eyes on social media. I follow a lot of these meetings to see what the results are. And I think that's very helpful to kind of keep me up to speed. And as long as I always have a new question to ask, that, is an easy way to push me forward.
Mm-hmm.
How much, when you mentioned social media, are you getting accurate information from social media, or are you getting reaction to what passes at some of these meetings?
Well, I mean, you get reaction. Now, if you look at social media, you're not always going to get a direct, accurate piece of information from there. But for instance, let's say, you're writing about a company that got in trouble for, say, stealing tips from their employees. And maybe you go on Reddit and you find a couple of people who are saying, yeah, I worked at this company and it was terrible. So I reached out to them directly. I got them to prove it to me. They actually showed me reports they filed with the state about the tip theft. And now I've got sources who can give me that side of the story. You take it with a grain of salt, but yeah.
Right. No. It again, as long as you're getting to the person who posted it or has an inside of it, I think, and in a lot of ways, that has been a good thing for the turn away from traditional media. And now we have more alternative sources out there. And, as someone who spent 30 years in newsrooms, I just can't believe now how easy it is for these newsrooms to just report on what's on Twitter. Okay. And I mean, it's a quote thing. It just, here's a quote, and they put it up, and that's a news story because it depends on who it came from. And if it's, related to a news story, they put it out there. And I don't know. I like the idea of the digging. I like the old days of the phone calls and working the calls and all that. And then developing sources and that you can reach out to, face to face or Zoom to Zoom, at this point.
Well, I got a question about social media and why cannabis is ideal for influencer marketing. And is social media actually worth the blood, sweat, and tears?
I mean, I'd say, from what I understand, it's debatable whether it's actually worth it. I mean, there's only so much of attention, say, I create for myself in terms of what I do on social media. But I do know that, I'm able to find information that way. I just don't know how effective it is for self-promotion.
What makes it so ideal for influencers? Because there's no existing dominant folks in there. I mean, what makes it so ideal for influencers?
I think it definitely contributes to the success of influencers because there aren't any, because it is new. There's this opportunity for lots of folks to kind of go that route,
Mm-hmm. David, what's some stories that aren't being covered right now that you want to see more of?
Oh, gee, that's a great question, Josh. I'm actually not certain on that one.
You sent me an article about REITs back in April that are going to be crashing down. That was my build on
on Zach's article and the reporting. The premise of that whole article was this case. And I do recall Jimmy telling me I got shredded by some of the guests he had on who thought the whole thing was a joke. And lo and behold, 2 days ago, that opinion came out of the first district. And what did they quote? They referred, or what do they refer to? Rohrabacher Farr, the budget amendment, which was, as I laid out how I see the dominoes falling, that's one of the first dominoes that I think is going to fall. I'm sticking by everything I had in that April 25th article. And to anybody who's watching live, if you're on YouTube, it's in the chat, the link.
Just because you're early doesn't mean you're wrong, David.
That's right. It just means you get ridiculed more, but that's okay.
That's one of the things people don't look at when they look at the cannabis industry, is the influence of REITs and real estate value.
So if you, Massachusetts prices are going down right now. And Aaron Goins, who's been on the show in the past, called me the other day and was telling me he was in a dispensary in Brockton, and I think they had $25 eighths. But if you bought a second eighth, you got it for like 50% off, something like that. And
yeah, that's my dispensary. Yeah.
Right. And we did the math real quick. And what we determined was they're selling it at retail at about $1,500 a pound. Right. Start to think about those kind of numbers. Well, that means wholesale. If you're going to live right, you got to be selling it at $7.50 a pound. Prices are coming down. And as they come down, I'm sticking by what I had in that Canary article on cannabis.net, that the big MSOs are the ones who need to keep the protectionist walls up. They can't afford, with their expensive indoor grow facilities, to allow cheap West Coast weed to come in. And I'll tell you where that cheap West Coast weed is going. It's going to all the social equity players, because those are the folks who didn't have the money to become fully integrated. So you either you grow it in-house and it's real expensive, and you're competing against some little operator down the street who's bringing it in from the West Coast and undercutting you on price. I think it's going to just be a fantastic time to be in the lower end of the weed business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we looking at a house of cards? Is it a race to the bottom here? Zach, what do you think?
I think to some extent, certainly if you're viewing it as in terms of investment opportunities. Because when it starts, everyone is, when the market starts in a state, everything's exaggerated, and then, people want to return, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think the house of cards is already, I made a prediction a while ago that I said 2022 is going to be the year of musical chairs. And a few months ago, a couple of merger and acquisition guys I know called me up and they said, explain to us what you mean by that. And I said, you're going to start to see the larger MSOs. Like Massachusetts, you're limited to 3 retail licenses. I said, you're going to see the people who've got 3 stores in Massachusetts are going to look at the worst store in their portfolio and say, you know what, let's get rid of that store and let's go get a license in a much better location. And that's exactly what's going on right now. We've seen it a couple of times. The MSOs is trading up their locations. Next year is going to be the year of the undertaker. We're going to start to see in a market like Massachusetts, we're going to start to see people going out of business. There's no doubt in my mind. We've got about total number of retail licenses. I was analyzing this earlier today in the state. This is coincidental, is 420. Out of those 420, 188 of them are provisional licenses. There's just about, it's like 45% of the licenses that are out there are for stores that are not yet open. So there's about 232 stores open, I think it is.
242, I think, actually, David. I think I looked that up.
Really?
Sounds
Because
about
the
right.
stuff I pulled off the commission this morning.
The commission's 3 months behind, okay,
Right.
when it comes to the public report.
I know that. But so they had 232, whether it's 232 or 242, right?
Yep.
It still is. Think about the fact that prices are coming down, right? Dispensaries are offering deals of buy 1/8 for 25 and get the second eighth for half price. And we only have 50% of the stores open that have licenses. Do you understand how crushing that could be to the market if all these other 180 odd licenses actually open up?
That's right.
Well,
I get it.
yeah, and I would also add that this has been covered and grown in by my editor Mike. I mean, just look at Michigan. With their growing seasons, everything's bottoming out there. Like that's a state that's now starting to see closures.
Yep.
Right.
And they started, I think, after us.
Right. Well, yeah.
Well, they
and-
just went nuts, I guess, with the cultivation licenses. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Again, this is why I love doing live shows more than anything else, because we really can look at what's going on now and today, and then look back at it like David's been doing and saying, see, we talked about that 4 or 5 months ago. You know, it's a fascinating time. It's why this Pro Cannabis Media Group exists. And we're certainly happy to have people on that we can count on, like David. And Zach, I tell you what, man, you're welcome here any Friday. You come up with a story you want to push Grown In, you're welcome on any one of these shows. All right.
Sounds good.
How do
Sounds like
people?
we're going to a commercial break, Jimmy.
I'm going to a commercial break.
Right.
Is that all right?
I'm gonna jump because I got a 5 o'clock client call that I'm 3 minutes
Who's
late.
running this? Is that
All right,
Dave
you
or
go ahead.
Jim?
Go ahead. You can. Well, it's a group effort, actually, Zach. David, thank you. Great to see you, Zach. How do
Likewise.
people sign up for Grown In? It's you just Google it, right?
Yeah, grownin.com, grownin.com, or shoot an
And-
email to Zach, ZACK at grownin.com.
I think you and Mike and the rest of the team do a great job. It's something, it is must reading if you are in this industry, because I think of all of the people of all those newsletters, I really think you guys turn it around faster than some of these others that are repurposing content from like even 2 and 3 years ago. Sometimes I'm seeing now. So we like the fresh stuff. Zach Hoffman from Grown In, thank you. Josh, stick around. We've got another journalist coming in from New Jersey. Dan Uloa from Hetty, New Jersey is going to join us next. Don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
Coming up on We Talk News this week, New York City cracks down on unlicensed infused food trucks in Times Square. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker continues to lead the movement towards expungement of records, but is it at the expense of safe banking for the industry? And the Teamsters is recruiting cannabis employees in Illinois, while Michigan shakes up their flourless products and increases total THC content allowed in edibles. All that and state-by-state cannabis reports from coast to coast on We Talk News with Elena Pinto. This media original content is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Accounting Buds, CPA services for the cannabis industry, and by stylighting.shop. Log on today to get your grow kit.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media, and welcome to Weed Talk News. While members of Congress mull over legislation about federal cannabis reform, one key senator says there's a big bill that's just not cutting it. It's the Safe Banking Act. This would give federal protection to financial institutions that work with state legal cannabis businesses. Members of the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition have written a letter to Congress issuing 10 specific recommended amendments to the bill in order to address social equity. Senator Cory Booker released a statement this week in support of the group's letter, saying in part, legislation like safe banking requires changes to ensure that the communities most harmed by our broken marijuana policies receive support. So, while advocates are calling for changes to that safe banking bill before it passes, Congress is also feeling pressure from state regulators to get the legislation passed. Washington State is one of many whose leaders are now calling on Congress to pass financial cannabis reform. And Josh Kincaid explains in this week's Washington Report.
I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge with the Washington State Cannabis Report for We Talk News. Washington state officials are still urging Congress to pass the Safe Banking Act. The lack of banking services threatens public safety due to the reliance on cash transactions. Cannabis retailers have been targeted by armed robbers. Earlier this year, there was a man that was killed by working at a retail store, and clerks have been shot at, beaten while on the job. And during 2022, more than 50 armed robberies of state licensed cannabis retailers were reported. So back in 2012, Washington was one of the first states to legalize adult use cannabis. With 10 years of legal retail sales now complete, Washington's system has matured in all, but one critical aspect is access to federally insured banking services and electronic payment processing. Earlier this year, the governor and the attorney general penned a joint op-ed calling on Congress to act. And together with the treasurer and lieutenant governor, they followed with a letter recently to key leaders in Congress. And even more recently, the state's Liquor and Cannabis Board Director of Enforcement and Education joined federal legislators for a briefing organized by the U.S. Cannabis Council. At the briefing, they unveiled new TV ads highlighting the urgency of congressional action on the Safe Banking Act. The act would give cannabis retailers more options to accept credit card and debt transactions, with customers reducing the cash on hand and hopefully resulting in a reduction of robberies. We'll keep you posted. Next week, you guys will find out more about the Washington cannabis scene. With that, we're going to have to roll up this Washington State Cannabis Report. I'm Josh Kincaid reporting for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
Missouri could become the first state to pass a voter-led effort to help prisoners of pot. Voters in the Show Me State are discussing spearheading what's called automatic expungement on their own, potentially voting for legislation that would require courts to automatically forgive past cannabis crimes. Missouri correspondent Brandon Jones has more from the Show Me State.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones from Distribution Maven, the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. And yeah, we are trying to get local citizens to put spear forward this effort to get automatic expungement. The biggest reason is because the new bill put on ballot here in November that we're going to vote on does not call for automatic expungement. It also has a couple of different stipulations that will still keep you in prison. And the biggest concern for people supporting the bill is it says the judge has the ability for good cause for denial. So no one has really defined what good cause is. And so at that point, there's no really precedent. So any judge should kind of deny that expungement just because of the way that they feel about the particular person in that case. So that's one of the main reasons that they're trying to find a way to get automatic expungement to happen here. Like we talked about the ballot being put on in November, there's a couple other things that people have read the fine line, the fine print that it's been since August 11th that it's been passed. So one of the major things is the people obviously that get licenses is very important. So they're going to give the recreational license to those already that have medical license. And the problem that people have with that is there was a lot of issues with the reports and how those people actually got those licenses in the first place. And then how little minorities we have. We only have one minority company here so far. And so they're worried about, how are we going to get more minority companies as well into here? So there's a couple things that we talked about. Expungement licenses on the ballot that are a big thing. And yes, we are very, very just people forward here. There's a lot of people on the grassroots just trying to make things happen to get all the people that are in cannabis or in jail for cannabis out. So very proud of the people here in Missouri just trying to spearhead it themselves. So again, I'm Brandon Jones from Distribution Maven of the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Have a great week, everybody.
New rules are now in place for Massachusetts cannabis industry. Last week, Governor Charlie Baker signed a new cannabis compromise bill into law, which designates funds for social equity applicants in the industry and sets up the framework for cannabis cafes. The governor only removed one controversial section from the bill, a proposal to conduct a study on medical cannabis use in students during school days. Meanwhile, the Bay State's cannabis scene is booming as more companies take root in the area. Weed Talk News producer is on scene with Air Wellness this week to take us on a tour to get lit.
What's up, guys? It's Tori Chamberlain for Weed Talk News coming at you from somewhere in Milton, Massachusetts, where I just got to spend the afternoon with Air Wellness and the Lit team on the Get Lit tour. So the afternoon started in Watertown at the company's new adult use and medical dispensary. We got to meet the co-founders of Lit and pick up some of their new flower for just a penny an eighth and talk about some great new strains, some of which haven't even been named yet. How cool is that? Then we traveled to an undisclosed location in Milton where we got to check out the Air Wellness and Sierra Natural's new cultivation facility. There we got to see the dry rooms, the grow rooms, everything the team is building out, and even got to talk with the Massachusetts head cultivator.
Normal people don't get to touch genetics like this. Like, these are so unique that, the entire time I've been in the industry, like I've never really worked with these kind of crosses. So having the ability to do so and then having direct contact with the breeder himself, like that's a paradise for a cultivator.
We've been trying to create lots of different cultivars that actually will work for this sort of, this sort of commercial cultivation, right? So it's great to see guys that are actually performing and hitting, the right sort of standards that we all look for in cannabis, and you guys really are.
The Air Wellness, Lit, and Sierra Natural teams continue to build their expansion in the Bay State with this new cultivation facility that's not even open to the public yet. But I got to take an inside look, and let me tell you, with this place having 16 massive cultivation rooms inside, it's definitely going to be a sight to see. And then we traveled all together over to Worcester to the Summit Lounge, because what is a good get lit party without actually getting lit and celebrating at the end of the night? So if you're out at shops in Massachusetts, whether it's Air Wellness or somewhere else, keep an eye out for that lit flower and try it for yourself. For now, I'm Weed Talk News producer Tori Chamberlain reporting in Milton. See you next time.
New guidelines have been set in Michigan for smokeless THC products like edibles and drinks, mainly by distinguishing new categories for oils and tinctures as well. The board chair for the Michigan Cannabis Manufacturers Association says the distinction will help companies avoid legal trouble. And the new regulations also double the amount of THC allowed in an adult use edible package to 200 milligrams, bringing recreational products more in line with medicinal ones. Michigan NORML Executive Director Rick Thompson has more from that state this week.
Hello again, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. Instead of several stories today, we'll focus on just one story: the current situation in Michigan's cannabis marketplace. Recently, we told you about store closures from some of the state's most well-financed cannabis retail and cultivation organizations, and there's more of that to report. Several social media posts have indicated a second wave of firings at Common Citizen has taken place, and that's bad news for those who are counting on those cannabis industry jobs. Jazz Cabbage Cafe on Tuesday had a special episode dedicated to those people displaced by the recent industry contraction. You can catch that one on YouTube, on the Facebook page, or of course on Pro Cannabis Media's television stations. Current reports from the Cannabis Regulatory Agency indicate July was a record-setting month for cannabis sales, but also provided further evidence of the decline of the medical market in Michigan. The overall sales numbers had regulated market cannabis sales in July at nearly 210 million, of which only 10% was medical, and that number continues to shrink. Per ounce pricing continues its decline, with medical sales at $110 per ounce and adult use at $121 per ounce. Now, just a few months ago, people thought $150 an ounce was the market's bottom line. It wasn't. Our problems continue to get worse, though, as the adult use industry now has 1.35 million cannabis plants under lights, and the medical industry has another 500,000 plants growing. Yeah, that's right. Our Michigan cannabis industry now has about 1.85 million cannabis plants under regulated market cultivation. Here's another tough statistic: the number of pounds of cannabis on the market in Michigan. Now, currently, retailers in both medical and adult use are holding about 82,500 pounds of cannabis flower. Now, that's a lot, but consider that cultivators and processors are holding 246,000 extra pounds of flower that's already passed testing and is being packaged or prepared for market. Now, that's 250,000 pounds. And those figures do not include flash frozen or infused liquids or infused solids or concentrates. So to summarize, there's a lot of cannabis on the market. Lots more cannabis is coming. Not many new retail stores are opening, and that means greater competition for retail shelf space. Earlier this year, I reported on a trend in California where shelf space in retail stores is being rented to cannabis brands. Some places in Michigan are rumored to have begun this predatory behavior, which may make retailers more profitable, but it places an additional hardship on the cultivators and processors who put out those cannabis brands, and it will absolutely disproportionately affect the smaller brand names. The increased competition on retail shops provides incentives for some companies to cheat at the game, and there are many ways to do that. THC inflation is the most obvious culprit, and that form of cheating seems to be creeping into more than one cannabis testing company in our state. Shorting the customer on their products is another form of cheating, making those 0.7 gram joints a 0.6 doobie without relabeling, or offering a 3.25 gram eighth instead of a 3.5 gram eighth. Cheating can also come in advertising, where the rules state pricing can't be mentioned in your ad, but if you do, the CRA just gives you a phone call warning. A tough market makes for a vicious marketplace, and nice guys don't always finish first when the sharks are running the show. Just ask former director Andrew Brisboe about how vicious this regulatory marketplace can be. But now, the good news. Our industry just set a new in-state sales record. There's more players in the industry, which means more opportunities for those ancillary industries. The Michigan Cannabis Industry Association just announced they have now over 400 members, and their summer annual retreat this past week was a rocking success. This weekend's Canna Cantina and Blues Brothers cannabis-themed events will also be very successful. Huge conventions like CannaCon and the Benzinga conferences continue to remind us Michigan is not only firmly on the national map, we are the center of the national map, and our market dominance is not going away anytime soon. Now, it is right that we pay attention to the troubles and the tribulations of the industry and community that we love so much, but those doom and gloom discussions should be tempered with both optimism and hope. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson for Weed Talk News.
Another state looking at changes is Colorado, but not with regulations. For the first time ever, the state is reporting a downward trend in sales. Colorado made national waves when it legalized recreational cannabis all the way back in 2014. And ever since then, their cannabis industry has been on the upswing. That is, until now. One of the biggest fears is that if the downward trend continues, state taxes that go to things like public schools will fall short. We'll keep an eye on what happens in Colorado. But for now, let's check in with Deborah Borchardt for this week's Green Market Report.
I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this is the business update for Weed Talk News from the Green Market Report. Earnings season is still upon us. This week, Cresco Labs reported approximately $218 million in revenue during the period. The company also reported that it has maintained its position as the #1 cannabis wholesaler in the country. Now, not doing so well is Greenlane, who delivered $39.9 million in total revenue during the quarter. That fell from $46.5 million in the previous quarter. The company also said it was looking to decouple from its cannabis packaging company, KushCo, which it merged with not long ago. Now, conspicuously absent from the company's earnings statement was CEO Nick Kovacevic, who had been the CEO at KushCo before taking on the role at Greenlane. Also turning in a disappointing number was Jay-Z's cannabis company, The Parent Co., who reported about $27.4 million in revenue. That was a 27% drop from last year. And the company also had a net loss of $30 million, and that's on top of last quarter's net loss of $33 million. Now, if you need total coverage of this week's earnings, head to the Green Market Report for more detailed reporting. And I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this has been your business update for Weed Talk News.
A battle over cannabis in the South. Some advocates for adult use cannabis in Arkansas say they are willing to wait 2 more years to potentially transition from a medical-only state to adult use. That's because some activists say the current Arkansas adult use cannabis amendment is simply a money grab for already established medical businesses, and they want to see more inclusive legislation before taking it to the polls. And next door in Tennessee, Democratic gubernatorial candidate Jason Martin is calling on his state to go green, tweeting this week, while our neighbor Arkansas is on track to bring in $60 million in funds for communities as a result of legalizing cannabis, Tennessee continues to criminalize small drug offenses and lets the cartels maintain control. Legalizing cannabis is simply common sense. Couldn't agree more. Now let's travel north to the Keystone State. Here's Claudia Post with this week's update from Pennsylvania.
I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. The Pennsylvania General Assembly has spent a lot of time in committee discussing whether to legalize recreational marijuana. But the Fed holds everything up more than the state level. One issue that complicates the legalization relates to the Second Amendment. And the Department of Justice continues to argue in federal court that medical marijuana patients should be barred from owning guns because it's a danger to trust regular marijuana users to exercise sound judgment. And I say, in parentheses, what about wine, beer, and liquor? Do all of those fine folks always exercise sound judgment? I don't think so. The second issue is that marijuana-related businesses cannot access the banking system due to the risk of federal penalties. The problem is serious, and that a national conference of state legislatures announced a policy change to support a cannabis banking reform bill, which is really terrific. However, over here in Pennsylvania, we have a woman named Judy Ward. She is in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, and she is so not informed about what the plant is, how it works, etc. So Judy says it's a horrible thing because it will risk workplace impairment of employees who are operating heavy machinery. Again, I go back to, does Judy have wine, beer, and liquor? Judy needs to take a class in cannabis. I would love to do it. Yet another issue is that state laws classify any driver as impaired with a trace of cannabis in their system. Now, when you smoke cannabis, it does not leave your system right away. It could stay there for weeks. So that doesn't mean that you smoked like 5 minutes ago. That means that you could have smoked 3 weeks ago and it's percolating around in your system, excuse me. So we have a lot of challenges here, but there are a significant majority of Pennsylvanians who support legalization for recreational use. And as I said, the difficulty is that with New Jersey rec, New York is going quickly. You have Ohio, you have Delaware. We're sort of in this terrible little pocket of stupidity here in Pennsylvania, and we're going to miss a lot of revenue, but oh well, can't do anything about it. Now, this is a really good one and very close to my heart. Having been in the transportation business for many years, I understand the difference in the misclassification, or should I say the proper classification of workers as independent contractors. Many people will bring on what we call ICs in an effort to avoid paying overtime. And I think that's really horrible. I had employees, I had ICs. My ICs were treated very well. They were paid on time for the work that they did. They could come and go, and they could set their own hours. There is a list of qualifications to be classified as an independent contractor, and it's right in the internet, and I urge you, if you're interested, to go take a look at it. But a company right here in Pennsylvania called Pharmaceutical RX violated the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act and the Pennsylvania Minimum Wage Act by not paying their drivers higher wages when they worked for more than 40 hours a week. I don't know anything about this company, and I am not going to condemn someone without knowing all the facts, but I would say, having been in that business, courier business for a long time, I know there were a lot of people who were skirting what they should have been paying and doing and whatever. I'm not saying, like I always say, I'm not a virgin, but I run a clean ship. And I think that you have to comply, especially you're depending on those drivers. They are your face to the public, and you better treat them just like you treat your employees. Hopefully, you treat your employees well. You must treat your independent contractors the same way. So there was a class action suit, I believe, because all the workers complained for an unspecified period of time and a lack of overtime pay. Pharmaceutical RX and its subsidiaries fired them and replaced them, the lawsuit claims. So they were they were acting up, says Pharmaceutical RX, and guess what? Boom, they fired them. That's just awful. So Pharmaceutical RX hired the 5 plaintiffs to deliver medical marijuana products to dispensaries in the Commonwealth. They were clearly employees. Now you have to, again, go prove that they were employees. That's a whole big other thing. And that the driving schedule was totally controlled by the company. The plaintiffs all used company vehicles and equipment to deliver the cannabis. None of them owned an independent delivery business, which you have to do. You have to have a separate book, would be, under Claudia Poe's delivery driver. But they didn't have it because the owner wasn't paying attention. And that's his job or her job. Shortly after being hired, the drivers often complained they were being misclassified as independent contractors and asked for overtime pay. The lawsuit claims the company said it would correct the mistake, but fired them instead. Nice going, Pharmaceutical RX. So that's a wrap from Pennsylvania. I'm Claudia Post, reporting for Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. From We Talk News, have a fabulous week.
Things may not be so sunny in the Golden State. While California cannabis regulators have been working to reform the state's tax infrastructure for the industry, businesses may have another barrier to entry as a provisional license program in the state is ending. Provisional licenses provided a path for businesses to continue operations and maintain state compliance while they applied for more permanent annual permits. But that program is now coming to an end, and state regulators now have 3 years to convert more than 8,000 of those provisional licenses to full permit holders. Cannabis could be more popular than people think. While most Americans willingly enjoy a nice cold beer or a cocktail, it looks like more of them may be looking toward the positive impacts of cannabis. Vote Pro podcast Phil Adams takes a look at the new poll and more in this week's DC Report.
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro podcast, here at the Weed Talk News DC Report. By more than 2 to 1, more Americans believe cannabis has a positive impact on people and society than alcohol. According to a new Gallup poll, 53% of respondents say cannabis is good for those who use it. By contrast, only 27% say that alcohol is good for drinkers. Additionally, 49% say the use of cannabis has a positive impact on society at large, compared to just 23% who would say the same about alcohol. This despite the fact that cannabis is still federally illegal, while alcohol is not. Significantly, the poll finds that those who have actually used cannabis are far more likely to advocate for its positive effects than would the small fraction of drinkers who feel that way about consuming alcohol. Gallup surveyed 1,013 adults over a 3-week period in July. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker said in a press release this week that changes to a standalone banking reform bill are needed for it to pass. Specifically, Booker says equity provisions must be included in the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act before it can advance. Booker, along with colleagues Ron Wyden and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, have long resisted a standalone banking bill in favor of comprehensive marijuana reform. Last month, they formally introduced the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act in the Senate. Since then, however, they have expressed a willingness to compromise on the Safe Banking Act. Booker's comments coincide with a press release from the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition, which calls for a series of 10 equity-related amendments to the bill. Among them are provisions requiring institutions to prove compliance with anti-discrimination laws and a mandate for regulators to promulgate best practices toward achieving racial equity in financial services. While Booker did not specifically endorse any of the CRCC's amendment proposals, he did call for changes to the bill that would ensure support for those most impacted by cannabis prohibition. That's this week's Weed Talk News from the nation's capital. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Here at Weed Talk News, we have told you about a number of lawsuits or legal controversies involving edibles that resemble popular trademarked candy. And it turns out the problem isn't exclusive to the US. Debbie Facey has that story and more in this week's Canada Report.
Hi, and welcome to Weed Talk News with Debbie Facey, your Canadian correspondent, with your weekly joint of the week. Here and in the States, we have been battling with an infringement when it comes to Skittles. Skittles is a well-known brand between both mature and the young, and has succumbed over a battle when it comes to marketing and branding. A lot of Ontario dispensaries have been selling these products where the infusion has either been laced over top or infused within the product and has been unfortunately landed in younger hands. With this being the case, Mars has been able to set a lawsuit on these 5 John Doe companies and have been able to, per se, win their battle. What we also have here in Vancouver, BC, Burnaby to be exact, is a strike of 33,000 workers where they are picketing right now at the border where their liquor and, unfortunately, their cannabis is supposed to be able to come through. With most of the stores in Burnaby having to deal with empty shelves, it has landed them to have to figure out ways in order to still fulfill their customers' needs and have not only their empty shelves not empty, but still be able to somehow find a way to restock them. One thing that Toronto Pearson Airport is thinking about, the GTAA Association has been in talk about including a casino and a cannabis store in the airport. This is to help with their $700 million loss over the last 2 years due to COVID-19 and the obvious turmoil with the amount of wait times and complaints that they have been dealing with. So they have been reworking and thinking of ways to bring in revenue from different outlets and with different partners. Let's see how that happens. Once again, this is Debbie Facey, your Canadian correspondent for Weed News Report, with your Canadian Weekly Joint of the Week.
And finally, if you are considering a trip to Thailand on the heels of cannabis legalization in the country, you may want to think twice. Just 2 months after new laws were passed that have largely decriminalized the plant in Thailand, this week the country's health minister discouraged tourists from visiting the country only to smoke weed. Despite the country seemingly welcoming the medical benefits of the plant, the health ministry told reports bluntly, "We don't welcome those kinds of tourists." People caught smoking in public risk facing a 3-month jail sentence or fines. So you may want to reconsider location if you're planning a cannabis vacation. And there are plenty of other options too. After all, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Remember to use it wisely. I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media. We will see you next time on Weed Talk News.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.